In this particular case, the Republicans were right.
So you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay?
Stephen A. Smith lit a fire on The View and completely blasted Sunny Hostin with intense force, calling her out for defending the same brand of wokeness that many believe helped fuel the DNC's brutal election loss, creating a moment so sharp it stunned the entire conversation. It's no secret that the Democratic Party's increasingly woke policies played a major and undeniable role in their collapse last year. Yet, Hostin continues to live in full denial, insisting their downfall had nothing to do with the ideological overreach. Voters clearly rejected. She keeps arguing that wokeness wasn't the real cause behind their setbacks, even though the evidence from frustrated voters pointed straight at it. Now watch how Stephen A. Smith tears apart her claims piece by piece, revealing exactly how this obsessive push for wokeness helped shape Harris's political disaster and turned a wide-ranging movement into a self-destructive misstep that echoed across the entire election.
I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that.
That's less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
but you know what? Add
ridiculous.
in the NFL.
But see, I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah,
you're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But most of the voters out there don't think like that.
But that means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
I find it truly astonishing that so many people still fail to see the real reason Kamala Harris and the DNC lost the election, because their defeat was driven by an intense and unrelenting obsession with wokeness that spread across the entire country like a wave voters refused to accept. Parents everywhere voiced serious concerns that were repeatedly brushed aside as if their worries were meaningless, leaving mothers and fathers deeply uncomfortable with their daughters being required to share bathrooms with biological men, despite the growing outcry that something felt profoundly unfair. Yet Democrats continued insisting this was some form of enlightened progress everyone was expected to embrace without question, even as families rejected the push for girls to compete in obviously unequal athletic matchups against biological men with clear physical advantages. These frustrations were not isolated or coming from fringe corners of society. They were widespread, mainstream concerns rising inside ordinary homes across the nation. Instead of pausing to listen, reconsider, or show basic respect, the DNC doubled down and dismissed anyone who disagreed as intolerant or uninformed. And that arrogance didn't just alienate voters, it exploded in their faces spectacularly. People don't want ideology forced into their homes, schools, or sports. They want fairness, common sense, and leaders who acknowledge basic biological reality instead of packaging controversial experiments as moral progress.
If you're out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills, and you're going to work every day, and you got a family to take care of, and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, you're stuck in traffic. You understand? You got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again,
maybe
I agree with
not
that.
Be uninformed.
Or you listen to stuff that's going to take you away from the things that brings down your spirit. And that's unfortunately what most voters are doing.
Most Americans are far too busy trying to keep their lives on track to sit down and carefully break apart every political issue or policy thrown at them, because they spend long hours working, juggling responsibilities, paying bills, raising families, and trying to stay afloat in a world that never stops moving. They don't have the time or energy to sift through pages of dense data, read endless research papers, or listen to panels of so-called experts argue over abstract theories that rarely lead to real solutions that help anyone in everyday life. So when something doesn't make sense or feels disconnected from their struggles, they vote against it instinctively, And honestly, it's easy to understand why that reaction happened so quickly. For the average American, the priority has never been wokeness, identity debates, or cultural experiments being pushed in Washington. They're focused on survival, stability, and simply being able to make ends meet. They worry about the rising cost of groceries, rent, healthcare, and gas. And they care about stable jobs, affordable living, and safe neighborhoods, not complicated lectures about pronouns, niche theories, or gender ideology being promoted in schools. In the end, economics, not political theatrics, guide their choices at the voting booth, because common sense built on real-life concerns will always outweigh and overpower any form of woke politics that ignores their everyday reality.
Because you were inserted, even though you were the vice president and it was the Biden-Harris administration, you had folks who are independent. I'm not talking about those on the right, and I'm not talking about those on the left, just independents, who said, wait a minute, she didn't experience a primary either. And the last time we saw her in a primary was 4 years ago, and she didn't even make it to Iowa. They used that as an excuse to point to her level of inexperience. Then you got the war in Russia and Ukraine, you got the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Hamas and Hezbollah and all of that stuff, and you had Trump using codes. Look, do you want her? Where is she? Where's the interviews? Where's she showing herself? Where's the tough questions? Where's the interrogation? And he leaned on certain things.
Here, Stephen A. Smith doesn't just criticize Kamala Harris. He completely dismantles what remains of her political career with sharp precision and unapologetic clarity that leaves no room for confusion. Harris never managed to build anything close to genuine popularity, not even during her time as vice president. And from the very beginning, it felt as if she was being pushed onto voters rather than chosen by them, creating a lingering frustration that only grew stronger as her policies drifted deeper into full wokeness. Smith highlights how this ideological shift pushed everyday Americans away. People who were exhausted from having political messaging forced on them instead of receiving real, practical solutions to the problems affecting their daily lives. He also calls out Harris for avoiding tough interviews, the kind of high-pressure conversations that reveal whether a leader has real strength, confidence, and competence, yet she repeatedly dodged them and raised even more doubts about her readiness. Instead of proving she could lead under real pressure, she stepped back, and that hesitation amplified concerns about her capability. Smith's breakdown shows exactly why voters rejected her so strongly. She was out of touch, untested in critical moments, and ultimately brought down by the weight of her own political arrogance.
Does everybody remember he originally said he was just going to do it for 4
That's
years?
right. That's what I brought up.
Right. And did you think that once you know who stepped in, he said, well, there's nobody, we don't have anybody?
Well, the point is that
That's right.
it's not about who you're going up against when you know you're not what you used to be. And see, this is where covering sports puts me at a distinct advantage. I cover people every day where it's time for you to go, but you're holding on and you don't want to leave. People who cover the world of sports are accustomed to seeing that all the time. You are the left, you leaned, and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist.
Stephen A. Smith couldn't have expressed it more clearly, because the Democratic Party ultimately became prisoners of their own extreme wing, the so-called woke squad, that slowly dragged the entire party off balance and far away from the concerns of everyday Americans. Instead of drawing a clear boundary or standing firm against the most radical voices, the mainstream left, and even those in the supposed center chose to remain silent. And that silence spoke louder than any statement they could have made, signaling to ordinary people that the whole party was moving in lockstep with the extremes. This created the impression that Democrats were embracing policies and rhetoric many voters saw as strange, divisive, or even dangerous, and by refusing to distance themselves, they allowed the belief to grow that wokeness had completely taken over their identity as a political force. When the election loss hit, the same figures who once defended that ideology suddenly tried to insist they were never that woke at all. But by then, the damage was already permanent, and the public had concluded that the left abandoned common sense for ideological theatrics that didn't help anyone. As Smith made clear, denial after defeat isn't a strategy, it's a sign of how out of touch they had become, and it arrived far too little and far too late.
The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want.
Yeah.
They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way. And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it, because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message, because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result of it.
The woke left eventually wrapped its influence around Kamala Harris so tightly that she was forced into a harsh and unavoidable decision: either bow to their rigid ideology or risk losing her place within the party. And unsurprisingly, she gave in almost instantly with barely any resistance. This wasn't shocking, because the woke wing of the Democratic Party has built a reputation for getting its way through pressure rather than thoughtful discussion or respectful debate, relying on intimidation and demands for complete obedience instead of genuine conversation. Anyone who dares to disagree is quickly labeled intolerant, threatened with cancellation, or warned that something valuable, whether a reputation, a career, or long-earned credibility, could be taken away. Harris aligned herself with their agenda in hopes of protecting her political future, believing loyalty to the woke faction would shield her from criticism. But by doing so, she pushed away a massive portion of mainstream Americans who felt increasingly ignored and dismissed. As she allowed herself to be pulled deeper into strict ideological positions, she didn't strengthen her chances. She shattered them, because voters saw through the performance, recognized the pandering, and rejected it without hesitation. In the end, she didn't simply stumble. She became another high-profile casualty of the very woke politics she embraced, proving how damaging that path can be when leaders ignore the people they claim to represent.
Do you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No,
at
I
this
don't.
point?
I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay?
Yeah.
But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that.
It wouldn't feel like a complete segment without Sunny Hostin stepping in with another round of her trademark confusion. And right on cue, she delivered exactly that, twisting Stephen A. Smith's words into something he never even hinted at, creating a claim that simply didn't exist. Out of everything Smith explained, not a single statement suggested that the Republican Party was some kind of fringe movement. Yet Sunny built that straw man to distract from the real issue and avoid addressing the actual substance of what he said. What Smith clearly laid out was simple. The woke left had taken control of the Democratic Party, pulling it further into radical territory and pushing Middle America away with cultural crusades that didn't reflect their values. Instead of standing up to the extremes, Democrats allowed themselves to be fully defined by them, leaving Republicans to step into the leadership space the left had abandoned and confront the ideological overreach spreading across the country. Smith wasn't calling Republicans fringe. He was explaining how they reacted to the vacuum created by Democratic leaders. And Sunny's attempt to spin his message didn't weaken his argument at all. It accidentally proved exactly what he was saying.
Well, first of all,
Say it to our faces.
Yeah, do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. We love our mamas.
I know that.
We love.
I truly believe it is long past time for America to move beyond the mistaken idea that leadership roles should be handed to women solely because they are women. Because while representation absolutely matters, identity alone should never decide who becomes president, especially when the nation is facing enormous challenges that demand real strength and proven ability. We are dealing with economic instability, border concerns, healthcare failures, rising crime, and increasing global competition. And these issues cannot be solved with symbolic gestures or shallow political statements that look good on the surface but fail to deliver measurable results. We need leaders chosen for their vision, their ability to make difficult decisions, and their record of genuine accomplishments, not simply their gender, because anyone who aims to lead the country must show the discipline, resilience, intelligence, and grit required to handle the heavy responsibilities of the presidency. America will gladly support a female president when the right woman steps forward, but she must earn trust through competence, not be offered the role as a victory for identity politics. And this is why the downfall of certain Democratic candidates had nothing to do with America rejecting women, and everything to do with voters rejecting incompetence, political performances, and relentless wokeness. Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton didn't fail because they were female. They failed because they didn't inspire confidence, didn't show effective leadership, and didn't connect with the everyday Americans they claim to represent, choosing instead to focus on identity-driven politics, while urgent issues like inflation, crime, border security, and the economy continued to grow worse. Stephen A. Smith was absolutely correct that the woke left held the party hostage, dragging it further into ideological extremes. And by refusing to break free from that influence, Democrats ended up sealing their fate at the ballot box, proving that America is ready for a woman president, but she must be chosen for her skill, clarity, and capability, not handed the position as a symbolic act. And with that said, the video wraps up by encouraging viewers to hit the like button, subscribe for more content just like this, and stay tuned for the next one.